Hello, everyone. Today, the Program Quality webinar series will be on speaking impromptu. For a change, we have panelists tonight, and I've prepared some interesting questions for them and had a few conversations. We will try to cover a few different topics. This is our agenda. First, we're going to talk about the scope of the webinar. Then we're going to talk about the webinar objectives. Then we're going to have our actual panel. And then at the end, there will be a Q&A. And then at the very end, there will be a raffle. So what is impromptu speaking? There's multiple definitions for that, but for the purposes of this webinar, we thought about it as an unexpected question. And that can happen in a social setting or in a professional setting. So social setting, if you're doing something like a hobby, if you're competing in the Table Topics contest, if you are trying to just be entertaining or tell a personal story. And in the professional setting, there's job interviews, networking events, and of course, the elevator speech. But the overlap between both of those is that skill set of being able to think on your feet and come up with compelling, well-structured answers. And today, our panelists are going to help you with that. The objectives are to develop strategies for you to have a toolbox to develop strategies, to develop impromptu speaking toolbox for both personal and professional settings. We'll discuss storytelling fundamentals in professional and personal contexts. And lastly, we will discuss the use of table topics as a tool to improve speaking and to just meet your goals, because we're all Toastmasters here, so it seems like the best place to consider how would you apply a lot of what we're learning today. The panel topics overall are, first, the panelists will give an elevator speech. So the only thing I will say about them is that they're all Toastmasters. They've been in Toastmasters for more than 5 years. In fact, they've all been in Toastmasters for longer than I have. So you have some very, very seasoned speakers. And then I've asked them to actually prepare their own elevator speech just to give you a sense of what that would look like. The next topic is preparing to be unprepared, then structure and delivery, unwanted questions, panic, that had to be exclamation mark noted, table topics as a tool, and then at the end, each panelist will give you some key takeaways. So our panel is Michael Bookman, Wayne Lebowitz, DaSilva. I would ask you to clap very loudly if you weren't muted. And to start with, we're going to have Michael Bookman give his elevator speech. Michael, please go ahead.
All right. Thank you very much, Gina. My name is Michael Bookman, and I deliver quality service and consultation to my management team, colleagues, business associates, and clients through collaborative teamwork, and by delivering comprehensive application of organization development and human resources management while participating in the strategic planning of organizations.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
That was excellent. Wayne, please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Wayne Lebowitz. When I was 8 years old, I was drawn into the family business, right? That's retail jewelry. And when I was 12, I was managing 3 stores for my family in central Massachusetts. Well, you can imagine, after a while, that got a little bit tedious. So when I went away to school, I wanted to be an entertainer. So I majored in theater, speech, cinema. After a couple of years, 2 of the professors I had chose me as their associate. And I was teaching their classes. One a class in public speaking, and the other a class in developing the speaking voice using the why buzz method. Well, when I graduated from college, 2 things I noticed. 1, Hollywood hadn't called me, and 2, neither had Broadway. I listened, but my name wasn't mentioned. So back I went into retail jewelry. Now being a retired jeweler, I thought it's two things I want to get back to: theater and teaching people to speech. So I developed Not Your Father's Improv, and 6 years ago I joined Toastmasters, which brings me to tonight's evening with Gina, Michael, Sean.
Thank you, Wayne. Now, Sean, please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Sean DaSilva. I started in Toastmasters. It's going to be 10 years next month. And I started in Toastmasters because I was, at the time I started, a manager and a trainer. And my supervisors, because I was doing so many trainings doing so many presentations, said, you know what? You really need more of an opportunity to polish your skills. Have you ever heard of Toastmasters? I said, no clue what the heck he was talking about. I was like, no. He's like, look it up, find a local club. Well, that was 10 years ago, and even though I'm not in the same position anymore, I still love Toastmasters. I'm still with Toastmasters because deep in heart, I love helping people. And Toastmasters is a great organization, not only to learn your own skills, but to help out and teach others, because we learn from each other. And I love this discussion, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Sean. I'm going to pause my screen share. And okay. So my very first question for everyone is, well, not for everyone actually. So for Michael, can you talk to us a little bit about developing an elevator speech for yourself?
Absolutely. So there's a few steps that I would encourage that you consider when developing an elevator speech or pitch, as it might be. One is to identify the purpose. Identify what the goals are, your audience. For example, I sought to inform you about my work, the type of work that I do, and what I do for organizations. You heard Sean DaSilva speak about his Toastmasters experience. You heard Wayne Lebowitz speak about his experience from childhood working as a jeweler and how that has led him to Toastmasters. So identifying what your goal is in the communication is very important. Number two, explain what you do. And that's not as simply as saying, in my case, I'm an HR consultant. Or in all of our cases, I'm a Toastmaster. You're more than just that. What is it that you deliver? Number three, communicate what makes you unique. And that's identifying what you bring to the table. What are your assets? And I would also encourage that you consider engaging your audience or whomever it is that you're speaking with. Now, neither of us took that step given the forum that we're in, but if you're engaging with someone one-on-one, that's an opportunity for you to perhaps ask them questions. For example, the question might be as simple as, how does your organization handle issues regarding organizational development and managing employee success? That would be pertinent to my elevator speech. So again, I'll leave you with identify the purpose or goals, number one. Number two, explain what you do. Number three, communicate what makes you unique. And number four, engage that person with questions.
Thank you, Michael. That was put in a very, very compelling and straightforward way. So as a follow-up, can you think of an example of an elevator speech that would be specific to an industry, for instance, or just to kind of walk us through the process of what someone might do?
Right. So For example, I know based on my experience in my Toastmasters club, which is in Somerville Toastmasters. That is a shameless plug. And we're near Cambridge. We have a number of attendees that have background in technology. So let's use as an example, someone as simple as an IT professional. They, and in this context, they may be speaking with someone about a possible career opportunity, or maybe they were posed with the question, what do you do for a living? So that person may state that they're an experienced IT professional, knowledgeable, and seeking to contribute, their training and acquired skills within a specific knowledge base, whether that be technical support or computer programming, to help in a given function. So the idea is you want to craft that elevator speech based on what you bring to the table. So again, in that example, you have this IT professional who's speaking about that they're knowledgeable in, for example, information technology, and they're a professional seeking to contribute their training and skills with, tier 1 technical support and or help desk role. Okay.
Thank you so much, Michael. Wayne, what about in an interviewing context, not interviewing, pardon me, a table topics context where you really might get just a random question? How can you prepare for that kind of scenario?
Well, I guess I've used the back pocket technique where I've developed a toolbox of stories and place them in my back pocket. And so when called upon, I go into that toolbox and try and come up with something that I can kind of engineer into what the topic is.
So can you give us a couple of examples of stories that you've come up with that you have used in the past?
Sure. Well, one day I went to the doctor for a physical, and I hate blood tests. I'm just not good at that. And the doctor said, I'm going to send in someone to take your blood. And I said, make sure it's someone someone you'd have take your blood. Mm-hmm. So you know how I am. I'm a little squeamish about this. So they sent in a woman, and she came in and she said, you know what? I've got to go out and get something, and close the door. When she did that, a couple of minutes, well, it seemed like a couple of hours later, she knocked at the door. I said, yes, can I come in? You know what? I really wasn't prepared for company today. I'm very sorry. The place is it's not tidy like I like it to be. I've got stethoscopes everywhere. So this brings to mind what I'm saying is every day you have life experiences, and every day you're working in an impromptu way to give an answer to whatever the question is. And sometimes you can put your own little spin on it and create your own story and put that in your back pocket.
Nice. Thank you so much, Wayne. So, Michael, when it comes to interview questions, going back to that, what are the key ways that one should prepare? What are the most important things to consider when preparing?
Right. One thing I do want to piggyback on from Wayne's response, which I think would be a great table topic speech. So really great job speaking off the cuff there and providing a wonderful story. You have to consider the context. What type of interview? It could be a telephone screen. It could be an in-person interview. It could be a follow-up interview. First, you want to identify the context, the situation in terms of what is expected. Do your research. Know the job. know the company, know the hiring criteria, and you also want to prepare yourself for that interview. As simple as when we think about our Toastmasters experience, in all aspects of a Toastmasters meeting in terms of programming, how you present yourself, how you dress, your body mechanics are very important, and your gestures. And think about those stories that you have in your past experiences as well. And I will leave you with, prepare your questions. It's not just simply an opportunity for the interviewer to ask you questions. It should be an interactive process. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. That's a really important point, actually, because I do think people sometimes overlook the importance of having questions, and that is a surefire way of engaging the interviewer, but also showing that you have an interest in the company. Sean, what has your experience been in terms of preparing for interviews? What have you found is a priority in terms of doing that well?
I find that preparation is a real key. And one of the suggestions I would make to people is come up with questions that you think the interviewer will ask you and write them down. Find a friend, fellow Toastmaster, someone who knows you, give them that list and say, can we practice? Sit down like you were in a real interview and really dress for the part. Be ready just as you would going into an interview. So this is your dress rehearsal, and have the person ask you questions. Tell them don't be afraid to change up the questions. This will help you to prepare for questions that maybe you didn't think of, but it'll also get you into the mindset of how you're going to answer the questions, be dressed and ready, how you're going to look, then have that person give you feedback. How did I do? Answering this question, that question, how do I look? This will get you ready for the job interview and give you the best opportunities to succeed.
Thank you, Sean. Yeah, and that's something that, in a way, Toastmasters can help you with, because actually Wayne has helped me prepare for interviews, and we've also helped other people. So you can go to your club and to your mentor and see if there's anybody there who, maybe you got a Michael Bookman who works at HR, or somebody who can help you talk about the specific field you want to go into. So tapping into that resource is great, and I really like what Sean said. So as a question to everybody, and I'm going to start with Wayne, is there a way to practice impromptu speaking? Wayne.
When I ran my improv group, I told them one way to do your homework is find articles at home, like a broom. Pick up a broom and think of 10 things that broom is. One, of course, it's a broom, but 2, it's a weapon. 3, it's, it could be a huge flashlight. Hey, you two, get out of the bushes there. What's going on? And it can be a shovel. But the point is, it keeps your mind thinking, what can I do next? I've got to be creative. I've got to think of something. And you'll find that the more you do it, the better you are attuned to answering impromptu questions.
Thank you, Wayne. Michael, what would you say? How do you practice impromptu speaking?
Right. I believe Wayne also may have referenced the point in speaking about storytelling is having some stories already prepared. And this is an interesting endeavor, and it does take practice. So think about your experiences. It does take work, and the work may be cataloging along a timeline. If we're thinking about it from a professional perspective, various accomplishments that you've had, you want to identify those, even write those out. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And on the point of weaknesses, identify how you overcame them or how you would overcome them so that you always have a positive bend on what might have otherwise been a vulnerability if you were to leave it as it is. So definitely, even with impromptu speaking, there is a level of preparation that is appropriate and that can definitely benefit you moving forward.
Thank you, Michael. Sean, what's your answer?
So I have to say that I love the Michael's comment of cataloging, because I think that that is important. You got to create your toolbox of what are your stories. Take those stories and look at them and say, okay, how can this story be applied to other speeches, other situations? Is there a common theme in this story? So you start writing down all these story ideas, and then once you have a good encyclopedia of stories, now you can start taking those stories and apply them to really any speech that theme fits into. So I have children. So I have a ton of stories about interactions with my children, family vacations, things like that. So if I'm talking about a specific subject and I feel like that story of going camping with my son will fit into what I'm talking about, I can just take that story. I don't have to prepare it. I've already told it. So look for those stories, look for those opportunities, write them down, rehearse them, talk to your family members about them, because there's an opportunity. You don't have to wait till a Toastmasters meeting to practice table topics or impromptu speaking. Sitting at the dinner table with your family, with friends, is another opportunity to practice and share stories and build that encyclopedia.
Thank you, Sean. So now that we've talked about ways to come up with content, let's go into structure. Wayne, how do you develop structure on the go?
Well, what I do is I look at, say, an Aesop fable. That's one way that I have a story in my back pocket. Take the tortoise and the hare. The nice thing is, with the fable, you have the beginning, the middle, the body, and the end. And if it's really an Aesop fable, you have the moral at the end of the story. So if we go back to the tortoise and the hare, you think of a situation where you didn't think you'd get that position. You thought there were people that were much better qualified for that position. But somehow slow and steady got you that position, whether it's a manager or an associate or whatever. And I'm sure everybody has one of those award-winning stories that fits into the tortoise and the hare. And the moral is slow and steady gets it every time. Also, covering your rear end doesn't hurt.
So would you say that it's important, for instance, in a table topics context, to have that same type of structure, or would you go more for a different type of organization, like intro, middle, conclusion?
Well, as long as you're thinking in terms of, I have a road to go up, I have to have a strong beginning, I have to have a nice story in the center, and I have to have a meaningful ending. It doesn't matter how you follow it, as long as you don't go back in the middle of the story and say, oh, by the way, there's another uncle I forgot to tell you about. You know, which does happen. So you just continue along that road, and yeah, you'll do fine.
Thank you, Wayne. Michael, would you add anything about how you would do this differently in an interview setting?
Actually, I believe exactly how Wayne described, that beginning, middle, and end, that can be employed in a professional environment, whether it's interviewing, networking, or the elevator speech, because storytelling is so powerful and universally applicable. Matter of fact, that can really reinforce and bring about a greater focus on the point that you're trying to get across, if you can encompass that in a story to make it more captivating, to pique their interest and to drive home your point. So I would definitely encourage that everyone think about their own stories. I would also mention that you want to be appropriate in how you may insert a story. So you don't always want to be very measured in thinking about what is being asked of you. And to bring about such a great point that Sean stated earlier, be mindful of relatedness, right? How you can relate or transfer those various experiences within a story that you have or stories into the specific context of an interview or a networking event. How can you relate that?
Thank you, Michael. That was very, very good feedback from both of you. Let's move on to delivery. Wayne, do you have strategies that you use to include elements of a good speech delivery in an impromptu situation?
Well, first, as you're going up on stage, smile. Secondly, get excited. I can do this. This is going to be fun. This is a game. I've done this game before, and I've won at it. And I'm excited. So passion sells. And if you're passionate about whatever it is you're talking about, the audience also will be passionate about listening to you.
Thank you, Wayne. And Michael, how should you think about your delivery in an interview context?
So here, you've got your preparation that we spoke about earlier. Even as simple as the logistics of making sure that you arrive on time. One of the things that is so important to our Toastmasters experience is timing. Arriving on time, being able to speak in a concise manner to get your point across. That is very important to delivery. Again, timing, being succinct in your answers, and following up, and following the interviewer's lead in an interview situation. They may direct you to, speak about something specifically, or they may be directing you to sit over here or over there. So part of that is recognizing that you're now in their space and you want to follow their lead. So all of that, I think of as logistical in delivering your communication in an interview setting.
Thank you, Michael. And moving on to the content of unwanted questions. So we've all been there. Table topics, you go up, you don't know what the question is going to be, and you get something that you just hadn't even occurred to you could be a question. Wayne, how do you handle that situation in table topics?
Well, if you really don't like the question, you've got to somehow turn it around. And at that point, again, you go into your back pocket in one of your prepared speeches. I know that we're talking about gardening, and although I'm not an avid gardener, I want to remind you of the time when I applied for a job, and I know gardening didn't come up in it, but I was thinking this could be worse. I could be asked to do gardening.
That's good. Yes, that's a very, very great way of putting it, and I appreciate that you gave us a good example of how to tie that in. So, Michael, what about instances where you're in a job interview and you really do have to answer the question? You can't redirect it. For the thing that comes to mind is the floss question, which I know is now outdated in some ways, but people still bring it up, sometimes in disguise. How do you address that?
Right. And that's a good question. And you do sometimes are asked. Maybe as simple as, what are your weaknesses? Or can you describe for me a time when you failed on a given project? And believe it or not, just as you stated, sometimes you can't escape the question, but I will leave you with this in mind. Be confident and be positive. You should always approach the interview from the beginning with a level of enthusiasm and positivity. So when you're faced with that question, now it's an opportunity to think about what are situations where I did overcome? And more specifically, now I can employ some of those stories that I've prepared and relate or reiterate stories that heighten your past experiences.
Sean, what's your take on this?
So I feel in any situation, any question that is answered to you, if it has a negative tone to it, you can always take a negative question and turn it into a positive. So here's just an example. If somebody asks you, hey, what's the your least favorite vacation you've ever taken? Well, maybe you don't have one. So you can always turn that around and say, hey, that's a great question, but let me tell you about my favorite vacation and why it was my favorite vacation. And bonus points, if at the end you can wrap it up and say, you know what, that was my favorite vacation. If everything went exactly the opposite, that would have been my worst vacation ever. So you can always take negative questions, flip them. Tell the person how you see it as a positive, and then answer the question at the end of, if the exact opposite happened, that would have been the negative aspect. So I think staying positive, like Michael said, is very important, and always trying to answer questions in that positive manner will be a lot better than trying to answer it to that negative.
Thank you, Sean. I would add that maybe make sure that you mention, so public speaking is not my forte, but I'm going to Toastmasters and I'm working on it. So you are giving them your weakness, but you're showing self-awareness and that you're working on whatever it is that you think you need to work on. And make sure that whatever you choose as your weakness is not vital for the position. Because if you're going to be hired to be a public speaker, then you really shouldn't say you're not good at that. Now, when it comes to panicking, Wayne, we've all been there. We are on stage, and you had actually maybe even a good answer for this, but your mind is blank. Like you just don't even know where to go. What do you do?
I would always have a plan B, something you can go to that no matter what, something about yourself. So again, you're sort of redirecting. It's a way of not panicking and giving yourself a little pause. It's better to say something than just stand up there and let us all panic. When you're in the audience panics with you when you panicked, and you're making everybody feel uncomfortable. So let's get with that plan B. I don't know where I was going with this, but I am thinking about whatever, and that's your plan B, your plan B story.
Thank you, Wayne. Sean, what do you do when you panic in table topics? What's your approach?
So my approach is, if at a moment you feel like you're about to panic, stop, take a deep breath, just pause. Even take the opportunity to restate the question. Ask the audience the question. Give yourself that moment to calm down and then continue on with the next thing that you want to talk about. I think that there's been plenty of times when people have gone up and felt uncomfortable or lost track, and that's when a pause or a redirect is a good way to kind of get your composure back so that you can continue on and finish strong.
I like that, and just keeping in mind that people don't necessarily know you didn't intend to pause. If it goes on for too long, they'll find out, but you can start with a pause. That's okay. In fact, I know of speakers that use it as a way to get people's attention because you're quiet on stage, but like, well, what's happening? And they may look at you. So that's good. And you obviously can bring notes with you to stage, but Michael, is it okay to bring notes for an interview to help you if you go blank?
Yes. Generally speaking, and matter of fact, it may even be in good practice. The notes can be a good reference point to ensure that you are able to speak on the points that you've identified, major points. Also, notes may be very helpful in outlining your questions that we spoke about earlier. And I encourage again that you consider asking questions, because that shows that you're interested in the job. And quite honestly, it also helps you to better assess if it's the right fit for you. So if you're faced with a panic situation in an interview setting, just as Sean mentioned, you can employ the same type of technique by considering a pause. And that pause may even possibly convey that you're thinking. And guess what? Take that opportunity to think. Take a deep breath.
Thank you so much.
And if you're really stumped, and if you're stumped and you're not sure, now insert a question. Or you may simply ask, well, I'd like to think a little bit more about that. If you can give me a moment, can we come back to that question? And most interviewers would appreciate that and understand, but make them aware.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, I definitely agree that asking for a moment to think about the question is not unheard of, and it's fine. Interviewers understand as long as it's not too long of a moment. So I want to make sure we have time for the Q&A. This has been great content, but we are going quite a bit over time. So I want to go with the using table topics as a tool. Wayne, how do you use table topics to get better at storytelling?
Well, first of all, I recommend that you volunteer for table topics every week. And again, an unsolicited promotion here. At Somerville Toastmasters, we videotape everybody's speech. Use the video to be really, really critical of yourself. See little tics and things that you do. You'll find that you probably repeat certain sentences or certain words too many times. Redirect yourself. Think of yourself as an actor. You're the director. And how could I be a better storyteller? How could I make this more exciting? You know, would I be excited if I saw myself there? What can I do? And you'll find in no time at all, you do make those corrections.
Thank you, Wayne. Michael, how about using table topics to become a better interviewee?
You know, Gina, not to sound trite, but ditto. Nearly, exactly as Wayne put it, which I thought was so well put. It's about practice. Using table topics, doing it, getting up there, participating. That's only going to make you better in speaking off the cuff, because you're able to now tap into those various experiences and establish reference points where there's a relatable story or situation that you've had. So whether it's that professional space or that social space that you're in, you will become better. So again, I can only reiterate, practice, do table topics.
Thank you, Michael. And I do think table topics also helps you become better at thinking on your feet when you're nervous, which is a huge plus.
Absolutely.
Sean, how do you use table topics to become a better speaker?
So the important thing about table topics is that you're building, again, that's in a short segment, your stories. So constantly practicing and participating table topics will help you to build that encyclopedia I talked about earlier. People ask me all the time, Sean, how is it you speak so often? And it's because I no longer take months at a time to prepare for speeches. I can come up with a speech topic, and I am comfortable enough in my own impromptu speaking skills that as long as I feel comfortable with my opening, my closing, I've got my stories in the middle, I can speak in front of a Toastmasters group, with an hour notice, or right on the spot if necessary. So that's something that table topics, because I participate so much and I'm building my stories, that helps me to be able to be prepared in any situation to jump in as an impromptu speaker.
Thank you so much, Sean. So I would like to move to the Q&A very soon, but I want to ask the panelists, do you have any key takeaways that you would want to add that you haven't had an opportunity to say? In about 30 seconds, please. Wayne?
Well, I think the key thing to note is that some people are afraid of impromptu or table topics, but our whole life is really impromptu speaking. We're always reacting to something someone asks us. When you get up in the morning and someone says to you, "How are you?" Well, you have an impromptu reply of some sort. "How do I do this?" Okay, you have another impromptu reply. So it's not so difficult to get up to be a speaker at table topics because you've done it time and time and time again. We're all masters at it. We just don't realize it.
Thank you, Wayne. Michael, anything you would add?
Yes, and here as a takeaway, and I know we've said it a few times, I can't stress enough practicing impromptu speaking and leveraging table topics. I'll also say employ some of the techniques that we've learned at all as Toastmasters. Ask questions when you're not sure or if you have doubt. Maybe that's asking a question to the audience. Maybe that's asking a question to the interviewer or whomever you're speaking with. Take a moment.
Ask
pause,
questions.
Take a deep breath. Because after all, you know, this is another interaction among many interactions that you have. So think of impromptu speaking as you would to a friend or a family member. Take the opportunity to gather your thoughts so that you're not nervous. So those would be my key takeaways.
Thank you, Michael. Sean, anything else?
I just like to add, I mean, my son just recently joined the Boy Scouts, and the motto of the Boy Scouts is always be prepared. And that is my message to everyone in impromptu speaking. You think it's on the spot, but there is preparation that you can do to always be prepared for any situation, whether it be table topics, whether it be an impromptu speech. You can create those stories. Think about way your stories connect to any topic, and practice. It's the only way. Take any opportunity, whether it is table topics or to jump in and be a backup speaker. This will make you a better speaker and better impromptu speaker.
Thank you, Sean. So there you have it. Practice, ask questions, and remember that every time you speak pretty much is an impromptu speech and an opportunity to practice. I want to thank our panelists for their time today. And now we're going to move on to the Q&A.